I could hardly contain my excitement as we pulled into the dusty parking lot of the old fairgrounds. My friends and I have been coming to this summer fair every year since we graduated high school. It was our tradition, a way to reconnect and have some fun together. This year felt extra special because I had just finished my second year of college, and I was ready for a night of thrills and laughter. But our experience that night would turn out to be more terrifying than thrilling. The fairground itself had an eerie vibe. It was held at the town's abandoned fairgrounds, which only added to its peculiar atmosphere. The rides were old and creaky. The lights on a lot of the rides were flickering or simply not on, suggesting bulbs were not being changed. I couldn't help but wonder what else may be neglected and not properly maintained. But I told myself there are check systems in place for this stuff, and that I was just being paranoid. I reminded myself that we were there to have fun and share in the adventure of the evening, and was able to shake it off. The smell of popcorn and cotton candy filled the air, mixing with the distant sound of carnival music and the excited screams of other fairgoers. It was a strange mix of cheerful and creepy, but that's what made it so exciting. My friends and I made our way through the fair, laughing and chatting as we tried different games and rides. But my eyes kept drifting to the new attraction that everyone was talking about, the Midnight Ride. It was a massive roller coaster, towering over the rest of the fair. It promised the thrill of a lifetime, and I could feel my heart race just looking at it. I turned to my friends and suggested we try it out. They eagerly agreed, and we made our way to the line, not knowing that this ride would soon become the most horrifying experience of our lives. We joined the line for the Midnight Ride. I tried to hide the fact that I was as nervous as I was excited. As we got closer and closer to the front, I couldn't help but notice how old and worn the roller coaster looked. The metal tracks were rusty, and the whole structure seemed to groan and creak with every passing breeze. I was watching people's expressions as they turned through the air, trying to get an idea of just how scary the ride was. Everyone seemed to be loving it, and that made me feel better. When we finally reached the front of the line, I noticed the ride operator. He seemed distracted, barely paying attention to the riders. He was talking to his coworker, laughing and joking around, instead of making sure everyone was safely seated. My friends and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we brushed it off. We were here for a thrill, after all. As we climbed into our seats, I struggled with my safety harness. It wouldn't lock properly. I started to feel nervous again, and I waved my hand to get the operator's attention. "Excuse me, my harness isn't locking," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He glanced at me, barely interested, and shrugged. "It's fine. It's just an old ride. You'll be okay," he said casually, then turned back to his conversation. I didn't feel okay at all. I felt super uneasy as the ride jerked forward, starting to move before I could secure myself. I grabbed the sides of my seat, my knuckles turning white. The ride slowly climbed the first hill, the chains clanking loudly, and I felt like I was on the edge of a nightmare. As the roller coaster ascended higher and higher, I felt my harness loosen completely. I clung to the sides of the seat, my heart pounding in my chest. The wind whipped around me, and I could barely hear myself think over the noise of the ride and the distant screams of other riders. Each second felt like an eternity as we climbed towards the peak, my fear growing with every clank of the chains. As the ride picked up speed, my fear turned into sheer terror. The roller coaster zoomed down the first drop, and I felt myself slipping with each twist and turn. Still clinging to the sides of the seat for dear life, I desperately cried for help. I tried to stay calm, but every jolt and twist made it harder to hold on. My foot slipped, and I frantically wedged it against the side of the car, hoping it would help me stay in place. My hands were sweaty, and my muscles ached from the strain of gripping so tightly. Each sharp turn felt like it would throw me out of the ride, and I could barely breathe from the sheer panic. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the roller coaster came to a sudden jarring stop at the highest point. The chains clanked and groaned, and I was left dangling, my grip weakening. I looked down and saw the terrifying view of the ground far below. The ride swayed slightly in the breeze, making it even harder to keep my hold. My friends, realizing what was happening, started shouting for the operator to stop the ride and help me. Suddenly, the roller coaster jolted again, but this time it wasn't moving forward. The ride operator had manually halted the ride. I felt my strength fading, and my fingers began to slip. Suddenly, amidst the chaos, I heard a voice calling out to me from the seat behind. A woman, another ride-goer, was shouting instructions. "Hey, put your feet against the front bar. You can use it to support your weight," she yelled over the noise. Desperately, I looked down and saw the bar she was talking about. With trembling legs, I managed to reposition my feet against it. The strain on my arms lessened immediately, and I felt a tiny bit more secure. Her guidance gave me just enough stability to hold on a little longer as I waited for the rescue crew. That small bit of support felt like a lifeline, keeping me from completely losing hope. Minutes felt like hours as the emergency crews arrived. They moved quickly, climbing up to where I was stuck. One of the rescuers secured a harness around me, speaking in a calm and reassuring voice, but I could barely hear him over the pounding of my heart. As they carefully helped me out of the seat and onto a stable platform, I felt my legs trembling uncontrollably. When I finally touched solid ground, I collapsed into my friend's arms, my entire body shaking. I was physically unharmed, but the terror of the experience left me deeply shaken. The fairground noises felt distant, almost like they were part of another world. The ride operator looked pale and horrified, realizing the near disaster that had just occurred. My friends and I decided to leave the fair immediately. The excitement that had filled our hearts just hours before was now replaced with horror. As we walked away, the bright lights and cheerful music felt like a cruel joke, masking the danger that lurked within. Later, I learned that the midnight ride had a history of safety issues. These problems had been ignored by the fair's management in favor of profit. This revelation made me furious and deeply disappointed. I couldn't believe how close I had come to a tragic end because of their negligence. My friends and family suggested I pursue legal action against those responsible. I was so eager to put this nightmare behind me that I did not want to involve myself further. I did, however, feel a responsibility to do what I could to prevent this from happening to anyone else if it could be avoided. So I wrote a letter to the authorities, explaining my experience again, expressing my hope that there are consequences for those responsible for the neglect, and stating that although I do not wish to pursue the matter, I believe that standards and checks for these traveling fairs should be revised. Reflecting on the incident, I realized the thin line between thrill and danger. The once exhilarating and carefree trips to the fair were now tainted with fear and caution. I developed a lasting fear of carnival rides and a new appreciation for the importance of safety regulations. The fair would never be the same for me. Each flickering light and each distant scream would forever remind me of how fragile life can be and how easily fun can turn into a nightmare. I was excited as we arrived at the summer fair. The fairgrounds were bustling with activity, and the air was filled with the smell of hot dogs and roasted nuts, and the sounds of cheerful music. Vibrant lights flashed everywhere, creating a festive atmosphere that was impossible to resist. I had just got my driver's license a couple of months ago, and me and my friends from school decided to take the 1-hour trip to this annual fair together. We were all on the same ice hockey team, so we were used to spending time together, but this was a way to have some fun together in a totally different way. Once we got through the entrance gates, we immediately headed to the ticket booth to buy tickets for the rides. We joked and laughed, daring each other to try the scariest rides. As we made our way through the fairground, we bumped into Katie, a girl from school that my friend Matt had a huge crush on. Matt turned bright red and stammered a hello, while the rest of us tried not to laugh. Katie joined us for a few rides, and I could see Matt was both thrilled and nervous at the same time. We rode the Ferris wheel, the bumper cars, and even the spinning teacups, having the time of our lives. After a while, we decided to take a break and grab something to eat. We found a food stall selling hot dogs and lemonade, and we sat down at a picnic table to eat. The sun was setting, and the fairground lights were becoming even more vibrant against the darkening sky. Sitting down also gave us a chance to look around at all the rides and games we wanted to make sure to catch. We tossed out plates and cans in the garbage beside us and headed back into the crowds ready to have some more fun. I passed a game stall offering huge stuffed animals as prizes. A big fluffy bear caught my eye, and I knew I had to win it for my little sister. I could just imagine seeing her reaction if I came home with it. I was determined, so I stopped and started playing, completely engrossed in the game. The guys didn't want to hang around, so we decided to split up for a bit, agreeing to meet back at the Ferris wheel in an hour. Time seemed to fly by as I focused on hitting the targets. Unfortunately, there was another player that beat me every time. I finally gave up. I turned around and realized I was alone. My friends were nowhere to be seen. I had been so distracted by the game that I couldn't remember what we said about meeting back up again. I decided to look for them and started walking in the direction we had come from, but everything looked different in the dark. The once cheerful music now sounded distant and eerie. The lights, which had seemed festive before, now cast strange, flickering shadows. I called out for my friends, but my voice was swallowed by the noise of the crowd. I wandered through the crowded pathways, but I kept ending up in unfamiliar areas. The fair seemed like a maze. My unease grew as I found myself in a less crowded, dimly lit part of the fairground. I was alone in a part of the fair that seemed almost deserted, and the sense of excitement had turned into a sense of dread. Then, I saw a man waving and walking over to me. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and a friendly smile. "Hey there, you look a bit lost. Need some help finding someone?" he asked in a calm, soothing voice. "I work here, so I know this place inside out. Just follow me and I'll get you back to the main fairground." Feeling instantly relieved, I told him about my friends and gladly followed him. But as we walked, something felt off. He wasn't wearing a uniform like the other fair workers. His clothes were plain and dirty, and he kept glancing around nervously. My gut told me something wasn't right, but I pushed the feeling aside, desperate to find my friends. My unease grew as I realized we are walking away from the crowds instead of towards them. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Trust me, kid," he replied, but there was a strange edge to his voice now. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt sure this was not in fact a helpful employee, but that his intentions were more sinister, and I decided to run. I turned to bolt back towards the main fairground, but the man was quicker. He grabbed my arm with terrifying force. I felt cold with panic as I struggled to break free. "Where do you think you're going?" he snarled, his friendly demeanor completely gone. His eyes were cold and menacing, and I felt a wave of pure terror. I fought with all my strength, kicking and twisting, trying to get away. My breath became short, frantic gasps. Finally, I managed to break free from his grip. Without looking back, I ran as fast as I could towards the lights and sounds of the main fairground. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, my voice hoarse with fear. The dark, isolated area felt like a maze, but I kept running, driven by sheer terror. I could hear the man's footsteps behind me, but I pushed myself harder, my legs burning with the effort. Finally, I burst into the brightly lit, crowded part of the fair. I stumbled into a group of people, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Help me, please! There's a man!" I started, but I couldn't finish the sentence. The fear and exhaustion overwhelmed me. A bunch of people rushed over, their concerned faces a welcome sight. The man who had been chasing me skidded to a halt, glaring at the group before disappearing into the shadows. I collapsed to my knees, shaking and gasping for breath. "Are you okay? What happened?" one of the fairgoers asked, helping me to my feet. Their presence was comforting, and I clung to the sense of safety they provided. "There was a man. He tried to grab me," I stammered, my voice trembling. They looked around warily, but the man was nowhere to be seen. "Stay with us. We'll get you to security," another fairgoer said, guiding me towards the main entrance of the fair. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as they stayed close, ensuring I was safe. When we reached the security booth, I explained what had happened, my voice still shaking with fear. The security personnel immediately alerted the fairgrounds management and called the police. They stayed with me, keeping an eye on the crowd. My friends, by now worried about me as I never showed at the Ferris wheel as discussed, rushed over to where all this commotion was going on, their faces shocked when they saw me surrounded by fair security. I filled them in on what happened. "Thank God you're okay." The police arrived about 20 minutes later and took my statement, and I was able to give them a clear description of the man. They said they may not be able to catch them, but at least they could put warning posters up around the fair with the man's picture. My friends and I were ready to go home. I didn't feel like driving, but none of my friends had their license yet, so I asked if they could keep my mind off of the events of the evening by talking to me about happy stuff the whole way home. As I lay in bed that night, nervous about telling my parents about the ordeal at breakfast, I thought about how a fun night at the fair had turned into a nightmare in just a few moments. I realized how vulnerable I had been, and the thought made me both scared and angry. The man had likely targeted me specifically, and that realization left me feeling exposed and distrustful of strangers. My parents were outraged and so supportive. As the days went by, they could see I found it hard to shake the lingering fear and made sure I saw someone about it. Crowded places now made me anxious, and I was always looking over my shoulder, wary of anyone who seemed even slightly suspicious. The once carefree joy of going to fairs and public events was now tinged with caution and unease. The incident had taught me a harsh lesson about the importance of being cautious and aware of my surroundings. I vowed to never let my guard down again, to always stay alert and cautious, no matter how safe a place might seem. In the end, the experience left a lasting mark on me. It took a long time for me to feel comfortable in crowded places again, and even longer to trust strangers. But it also made me stronger and more aware of the dangers that can lurk in unexpected places. Jake and I arrived at the large summer fair just as the sun was setting. The fairground was alive with colorful lights flashing everywhere, cheerful music blaring from every direction, and the excited chatter of fairgoers filling the air. The smell of roasted nuts, sugary cotton candy, and greasy hot dogs mingled together, creating a deliciously inviting aroma. As a married couple in our 30s, leaving our kids with my parents to enjoy some old-school fun was a real treat that made us feel young again. We were both thrilled to be there, ready to enjoy all the attractions and indulge in the fair food we loved. As we made our way through the bustling crowds, we marveled at the myriad of rides, game booths, and food stalls. The Ferris wheel towered above everything, its lights casting a glow over the fairground. The laughter and screams from the roller coaster added to the excitement. We decided to try a few games, our competitive spirits high, and laughed together as we failed miserably at winning any prizes. After a while, we decided to take a break and freshen up. Jake headed to the washroom, and I waited for him outside. As I waited, I noticed a man dressed as a fair security guard standing nearby. At first, I didn't think much of it, but something about him seemed off. He wasn't patrolling or helping anyone. Instead, he was just standing there, watching people intently. His eyes seemed to follow each fairgoer with a cold, calculating look. As I continued to watch him, I felt a growing sense of unease. When Jake came out of the washroom, I quickly pulled him aside. "Jake, there's something weird about that security guard over there," I whispered, nodding towards the man who was still standing in the same spot, watching people with that unsettling gaze. Jake glanced over, his brow furrowing. "You think he's up to something?" "I don't know, but he gives me the creeps," I replied. "Let's keep an eye on him for a bit, just to be sure." Jake nodded, and we started walking away, trying to act casual. I could feel my heart pounding as we moved through the crowd. I glanced back and saw the man following us, his eyes locked on Jake. My stomach twisted with anxiety. We passed through a less crowded area of the fairground, the cheerful noises of the rides and games fading into the background. I could feel the man's presence getting closer, and my unease grew. Suddenly, I saw him reach out and snatch Jake's wallet from his back pocket. "Hey!" Jake shouted, spinning around to face the man. "Give that back!" The man tried to play it off as a mistake, holding up his hands innocently. "Sorry, I must have bumped into you. Didn't mean to take anything," he said, but his eyes told a different story. They were cold and calculating, and I knew he was lying. Jake wasn't buying it either. He told the man that we are not stupid and to give it back, stepping closer to him. The tension between them was palpable, and I could feel my heart racing. Suddenly, the man shoved Jake hard, trying to make a run for it. "Hey, stop him!" Jake shouted as he regained his balance and took off after the man. Without thinking, I followed, shouting for help as I ran. We weaved through the crowd, dodging people and obstacles. The festive lights blurred around me as I focused on keeping up with Jake and the thief. The fair's cheerful music and laughter now felt distant and eerie, drowned out by the pounding of my heart and the sound of our footsteps. The chase led us to a secluded area near the back of the fairground, where the lights were dimmer and the crowds thinned out. The man ducked behind a ride, trying to lose us. Jake didn't hesitate, following him into the shadows. I was right behind them, my fear growing with each step. Jake caught up to the man, and they began to struggle. The thief was strong and desperate, and I could see the glint of a concealed weapon as he pulled it out. "Jake, watch out!" I screamed, rushing forward to help. In the chaos, the man shoved me hard, and I stumbled backward, falling into the path of a moving ride. The world seemed to slow down as I saw the ride's gears and machinery inches from my face. With a desperate roll, I managed to avoid it, feeling the rush of air as the ride sped past me. I lay on the ground, trembling and gasping for breath, realizing just how close I had come to serious injury. Jake and the man were still struggling, but my scream and the commotion had drawn the attention of fair security. They rushed in, pulling the man away from Jake and disarming him. The thief's cold eyes met mine one last time before they led him away, his expression still menacing and unrepentant. Fair security, drawn by the noise and commotion, arrived at the scene and quickly apprehended the man. I watched as they pinned him to the ground, my heart still pounding from the adrenaline. Jake rushed over to me, his face pale with worry. He helped me to my feet, and I brushed myself off, still feeling the rush of the near miss with the ride. The security guard stood the man up and led him away, keeping a firm grip on his arms. They communicated with their team, and soon the police arrived, their flashing red and blue lights adding to the surreal atmosphere. The fairground that had seemed so fun and lively just an hour ago now felt dark and dangerous. The police took statements from us and the security guards, piecing together what had happened. It turned out that the man had a long history of theft and had been infiltrating fairs by posing as a security guard. He would blend in with the crowd, looking for easy targets to steal from. Since we did not make it easy for him, his violent side came out. As we drove away from the fairground, the night's events replayed in my mind. What was supposed to be a night of fun had turned into a terrifying ordeal. I couldn't shake the image of the man's cold eyes and the feeling of being so close to danger. The excitement we had felt at the beginning of the night was now overshadowed by fear and unease. The realization that the man had been targeting us specifically made me feel vulnerable and angry. We had been so close to serious harm, and it all happened so quickly. It was a reminder that danger can lurk in unexpected places, even in a seemingly safe and fun environment like a fair. The experience left me with a lingering fear of crowded places and a newfound distrust of strangers. I knew it would take a long time for me to feel comfortable in such environments again. I also realized the importance of being cautious and aware of my surroundings at all times. Jake and I made a silent promise to each other to always stay vigilant and look out for one another. Our once carefree trips to the fair would now be tinged with a sense of caution and vigilance. We would never forget the night we faced the Masked Menace, and the lessons we learned would stay with us forever.